Good evening, everybody. I'm Cantor Emma Lutz. I'm so excited to welcome you tonight for this really special conversation about music in Los Angeles. I am thrilled to be able to be joined by my friend and my colleague, my Rabbi Yoshi Zweiback. And we have a very special guest with us this evening as well, Dr. Mark Kligman, who, like Rabbi Yoshi, actually was my teacher at the Hebrew Union College. I studied with him for 2 years at the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music. And Mark, I have to say, you're really what I like to call a friend-tor, part friend, part mentor, and also certainly my Jedi master. Absolutely. Mark and I share a love of all things Star Wars and all things Jewish music. So you may hear, you're going to hear a lot of wisdom and history and music tonight, but you might hear a couple of jokes as well. But we're so thrilled that you've joined us. Mark and I had a conversation a while back about how New York is sort of seen as the center of Jewish musical life in the United States. And we really wanted to share some teachings, some recordings, some wisdom about how that isn't the case, that Jewish musical life in Los Angeles is actually such a vibrant and thriving entity. And we're really lucky to have Rabbi Yoshi here to join us, because not only was he a touring musician, and you get to hear him on our Bima every Friday night and hear his amazing voice and guitar playing skills, but he's also a very prolific composer. So he has a unique perspective that he can offer us about Jewish music, particularly in LA. So again, thanks for joining us. We're going to hear a bit of teaching from Dr. Kligman, and then Rabbi Yoshi and I will share in the conversation, and then we'll open it up for questions and also share about some future collaborations between Dr. Kligman and me. So I'm just going to share his bio, and then we'll hear some wisdom from him. Mark Kligman is the inaugural holder of the Mickey Katz Endowed Chair in Jewish Music at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music, where he is a professor of ethnomusicology and musicology. He specializes in the liturgical traditions of Middle Eastern Jewish communities and various areas of popular Jewish music. He has published on the liturgical music of Syrian Jews in Brooklyn in journals, as well as his book, Makam and Liturgy, Ritual Music and Aesthetics of Syrian Jews in Brooklyn, which shows the interconnection between the music of Syrian Jews and their cultural way of life. His other publications focus on the intersection of contemporary Jewish life and various liturgical and paraliturgical musical contexts. Orthodox popular music is the subject of his current work. So interesting. He is the academic chair of the Jewish Music Forum and co-editor of the journal Music Judaica. He's on the board of the Association for Jewish Studies, and Professor Kligman is the current director of the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience that launched in December 2020. So some of you may have enjoyed beautiful music in our Katz Family Pavilion. And Dr. Kligman is the Endowed Katz Chair. And of course, we have our mutual friend, Lowell Milken, and we're going to hear later a little bit about his role in supporting Jewish music in Los Angeles. So before I pass the mic to Dr. Kligman and we hear his teachings, Rabbi Yoshi, just want to let you say hello and hear some wisdom from Kobe, maybe.
Well, you know, it feels in some ways like back on this couch doing a webinar. I sort of feel like I'm home in a very strange way. I mean, I am literally home, but as this was starting, I was like, wow, I haven't done this in a while because we've had so many in-person experiences, but it's really nice to have this experience. And I know for a lot of people joining us, you know, at 7 o'clock at night, it's nice. You can hear Dr. Kligman's wisdom. You can see Cantor Emma. You can hear from me, and Kobe's back. So there we go. But I've known Dr. Kligman since I was a student at the Hebrew Union College way back when. I didn't have the privilege of studying at the School of Sacred Music, but I did get to spend some time with him on the New York campus. And then when I worked for the Hebrew Union College on our Jerusalem campus, I had a chance to interface with Dr. Kligman, and I know his brother Larry very well. When I was head of Y School, Larry gave me some great advice along the way about being a school head. And so I'm fans of the family and I'm glad to be part of this. And I'm excited about the conversation. Jewish music has been, for me, my entry really into a professional Jewish life. My very first job in the Jewish world was a song leader. I was 15 years old, and the temple educator, Jane West, hired me to be the song leader at Sunday school. And then I worked at Jewish summer camps. And so Jewish music has always been an entry point for me in terms of my own Jewish identity, and it shaped me and inspired me. And then also once I started to play the guitar and song lead, and then later as a composer. And so I'm really, really excited about the conversation, and I'm passionate about the subject matter. I'm grateful to Dr. Kligman for everything he's done in the field. And as well, what's happening at UCLA right now is really, really exciting between the Mickey Katz Chair and the Lowell Milken Center for Jewish Music. There's some really, really amazing things happening here on the West Coast, and we are right at the center of it. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Cantor, Lutz, and Rabbi Zweiback. It's really great to be with you. I feel a real closeness to Stephen S. Wise Temple for a number of reasons. One, most recently, is my son is now a graduate of the Milken Community School. And in addition, as you all heard, being able to teach such wonderful students as Cantor Lutz and working with professionally with Rabbi Zweiback is a real highlight in my work at HUC. So I feel like I'm coming back as well. So I wanted to start off by saying it's not only great to be here with Stephen Wise Temple in this virtual sense. I just look forward to the time that we can all be together and do things in your synagogue, which is really beautiful, and we'll talk more about that. One of the things that you heard Cantor Lutz describe is a conversation we had in regards to the fact that so much of the study of Jewish history, Jewish culture in the United States is so New York centric. I grew up in the Valley. I went to Temple Ramat Zion. I went to Granada Hills High School. I graduated from Cal State Northridge, where I studied music and met my wife. So I'm a Valley boy. I really take my LA roots with really great pride. But at the time that I was studying in the 1980s, there really wasn't the vibrancy of Jewish music in the way that I could study it in an academic sense. So that led me to New York and started my career in New York. And part of my motivation to come back to LA and to do the work I do at UCLA is to really spend time and really talk about how unique Los Angeles is in a Jewish musical sense. And so this is a beginning of that study and that work, and I look forward to our conversation. So hopefully in the few minutes I have with you, I'll share with you just some thoughts on the history that I've begun in my research, and look forward to the conversation and where we go from there. If we look at Jewish music in Los Angeles, the good news is it's a very big topic. It's a very rich and broad and complex topic. So this is my sort of foray into beginning that conversation. So what I'd like to do is just share with you, as I said, some aspects of this research. And what we're going to do is we're going to begin by looking at 1938. And what I find so interesting about 1938 is it really shows an interesting picture of Los Angeles and Jewish music. And even in 1938, it's of great interest. So what I want to begin with is to say that in the Boyle Heights community in East LA, where there's a big part of the Jewish community, at the Cincinnati Street Synagogue, was this very famous cantor by the name of Pierre Pinchik. This is an announcement that he will be leading High Holy Day services. And these images you see all come from the B'nai B'rith Messenger. Also appearing in Boyle Heights at the Breed Street show is Cantor Samuel Malofsky. And Malofsky is well known for being a student of the famous cantor Yosela Rosenblatt, and Malofsky also toured with his family, and there are many wonderful videos of Malofsky. If you're interested in Malofsky, I could tell you more, We've been in contact with the family. We now have some of their archives at UCLA. But this provides an interesting picture that East LA, in the older immigrant community, you have these traditional cantors. Now, at the same time, in the same newspaper, just on a different page, Arnold Schoenberg, perhaps the best well-known composer of that time in 1938, who had already come to America, was commissioned to write a new Kol Nidre liturgy. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And also, on this very same page is an announcement that entertainer Eddie Cantor is going to come and greet people at the Hollywood Jewish Community Center. So the scene that I want to set is that if we triangulate LA at that time in 1938, I wish I had a historic map, but this is what I had to put together for you, is that if we look on our right side, we see the Breed Street Shul in East LA as marking the traditional end of the community where traditional cantors are coming. And at that time, the west part of the Jewish community in 1938 was the Fairfax community. And the Fairfax Temple had a lot of the educated German Jews that came to LA that were settling in Fairfax. And then in the northern part of this triangulated view of the LA community, we see that Eddie Cantor is providing entertainment and as a personality coming to be part of the Jewish community there in Hollywood. So this aspect to me of the East LA being the tradition and the West LA being the seed of this tremendous innovation is a real beginning of what LA's creativity in Jewish music is for a period of time. So to give you a few more insights into this moment, Cantor Pierre Pinchik comes to LA, and his announcement of his arrival that is, so people were so excited that they just simply described in the B'nai B'rith Messenger that Cantor Pierre Pinchik arrived in Los Angeles. And then a week later, they said, this is his first appearance in Los Angeles for the high holidays. So having Pierre Pinchik in Los Angeles is a really important moment. The impetus behind having Arnold Schoenberg write a new Kol Nidre is from Rabbi Jacob Sonderling. He was a cantor in Berlin that came to Los Angeles, and he tried to galvanize the German Jews, some who were not looking favorably at Judaism, and trying to find ways to make Judaism inspiring and exciting. He was a Reform rabbi, and he started something that's called the Society for Jewish Culture at the Fairfax Temple. And this is at 5th Street and Fairfax. The building still remains, and it's no longer a Reform synagogue. And Rabbi Sonderling's idea was to bring people to the synagogue. Art and culture was a very important modality of expression. And he and his wife led all sorts of art classes and felt that every wall of the synagogue needs to be filled with art and creativity and expression. And they spent a great deal of time and energy doing that. The announcement of the Schoenberg Kol Nidre is in conjunction with another interesting individual, Henry Rosenblatt, who's one of the many sons of Yosela Rosenblatt. And Henry Rosenblatt was a known opera singer at the time. And he went by a performing name of Paul Dessau, a very interesting story about him. And this particular high holiday service in 1938 featured a newly written work by Arnold Schoenberg, where he and Rabbi Sonderling wrote a new text to Kol Nidre. And this is a work that is for a very large orchestra and choir and with a narrator. Very, very interesting work. And they performed it at the Ambassador Hotel. This led to some other interesting services and collaborations. This Toch material from that event, I haven't been able to find what work that Toch did, but Toch, like Schoenberg, was a German European exile. In fact, I think Toch might have been from Vienna. Toch was a very prolific composer and also taught in Los Angeles. I wanted to share with you some of the other interesting features about Jewish music. As you can see in this newspaper of the advertisement of various congregations, we see that Cantor Malofsky is assisted by a trained choir. In the lower part, you see Cantor Itzikol Schiff is going to be accompanied by a well-trained cantor. And this aspect of featuring choirs with the select male voices, or this one is even more interesting to me, at Hollywood Temple Bethel, was assisted by an augmented choir. I'm not exactly sure what they meant by augmented at that time, but I assume it means that it was an additional choir. Another interesting feature that's worthy of note is that in every edition of the B'nai B'rith Messenger at this time, there's a column on music in Los Angeles. And often it's talking about the predecessor to the LA Philharmonic, the LA Symphony, and also various activities at the Hollywood Bowl. So this announces that there's a new American opera called Gettysburg that was at the Hollywood Bowl. And you see all sorts of announcements of activities like that. And here's just a week later, September 9th, another aspect of how the Hollywood Bowl season was coming to an end. So presumably the Jewish community was very involved in classical music, going to the Hollywood Bowl and so forth. A similar thing happens in 1941 for Passover, where Eric Korngold is commissioned to write a piece for a community Passover Seder, and it's called the Passover Psalm. And Eric Wolfgang Korngold is a Jewish emigre to America and is sort of the, before we had John Williams as a great symphonic composer of musical scores, there was Eric Korngold. And he wrote incredible orchestral scores. Some of the ones I list here, one that's called King's Row. It's a shout out to Cantor Lutz. Many feel that it inspired John Williams in his theme for Star Wars. But having someone as noted as Korngold also composed for the synagogue was something that Sonderling really sought to do, to really have the best of art and culture come into the synagogue. And that was done, and really an innovatively done thing here in Los Angeles. Just to look forward to some very similar things, in 1960, you can see this announcement of Jan Pierce singing in a program that's going to be premiered on CBS TV for the high holidays called The Song and the Prayer. And in addition, the music column at this time is now talking about Leonard Bernstein and his visit to the Hollywood Bowl in September 5th of that year. So this goes on and on for a while. So I want to just share with you a couple other points. One is in some of the activities we're doing at the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience is working with some wonderful interviews of the Milken archive. There are 150 interviews of Jewish musicians that they've done. We're continuing to do interviews of noted cantors and composers and performers. And this is a very interesting interview that was done, might be 20, 25 years ago, of two men who made their careers in Los Angeles. On the right is Julius Blackman. He died at 105 years old. And he was a cantor and a synagogue choir singer in Los Angeles. He was at Sinai Temple for a while. Then he moved up in the 1960s to San Francisco. And another person born the same year is Julius Blackman. So both of these men were in Los Angeles in the late 30s and the early 40s. And this is just an interesting moment of their reminiscence. And what's common about their story is that they both grew up in Chicago. And if many of you may know that there's a disproportionate number of Chicagoans, as they would say, who are in Los Angeles. Perhaps LA was, the end of of the very famous highway whose name I'm blinking on at the moment. But the aspect of these transplanted men from Chicago and other individuals is an interesting part of the story that's emerging for me. But I'd like you to just hear a couple of minutes of them describing, looking back on the 1940s.
Okay, that's good. Okay, now what's the story? This is you in
1945, probably, when I officiated in Boyle Heights for the high holiday.
Beth David.
Huh?
Beth David.
Beth David.
In Cornwall.
Yes. And the beautiful part about it is that I have the letter, you'll see that they paid me the highest price that they ever paid the
Now what's
Cantor.
this? What's
This
this
is the
picture?
ensemble.
This is the.
This was in my shul. There's Julie, and this is the ensemble, and the others. In my shul, what I mentioned.
That's the Cantor ensemble we were just
Ensemble.
talking about.
Yes.
There's no year on here, so.
The
but-
year about in the 50s.
All right. These are various clippings from the Yiddish papers. Now,
Yes.
these Yiddish papers here in Los Angeles?
No.
No.
Yes.
there were
I'll
Yiddish
tell you what
papers
happened.
here.
They had a branch here, and whenever some
Some
events
events
of importance occurred, and there was the Yiddish Culture Club, then they would list that.
There
Here's
was a
the-
Yiddish Kultur Club here in Los
And it
Angeles.
still exists.
For a month, every month they would have
Well, it's not
readings,
really, but
but
no.
not the way it
Those
used to
days
be.
it was really, they had a lot of hundreds of members.
And you got
etc.
involved with them?
Very
you're
much.
saying, because
I became, because I never charged. So as I said, I later learned to sing some Yiddish, very heavy repertoire. And so I would be called upon to do these things.
But this is says forward. That means,
Yes,
but this is a
yes,
Los Angeles
yes,
edition of the
yes,
forward? Did they
yes,
have a Los
yes,
Angeles
yes,
edition?
yes.
They had a Los
Could have been
Angeles
nationally also, but
Well, it says-
distributed in
Yes.
LA.
It says here,
No.
Chazan Katzman mit sein Chor.
yes,
What was-
yes, with my choir.
Yeah. Well,
May I?
yeah. Hold it up
What
first.
year?
Okay. I can identify that later. It's not a problem.
Yeah, I did a third Seder for the Yiddish Kultur Club. They used to have a third
Oh, tell me
Seder. They
about
had a dance group,
Yeah.
trained in modern dance style. They interpreted the crossing of the Red Sea and some Yiddish club
This was when? In the 50s?
in the 50s. Tayer de Malke, gesund tust du sein. Den Becher mit Wein. Did that. And then the Sag mal an, du Bruder meine, wo ist greater Seder deine? In tiefer Heil nach Rede, dort hab ich gegräht mein Seder. Sag mal an, wo wird sich werden, wenn wir mit ein Kolde werden? Wenn der Säune wird mich fangen, will ich sterben mit Gesangen. Wenn der Säune wird mich fangen, soll ich sterben mit Gesangen.
You know who wrote, it's great. You know who
So they go on to talk about a cantorial ensemble that they formed, which you saw a picture of very briefly with a group of men, and they performed throughout synagogues of Los Angeles. So I just want to conclude my portion by talking about the first half or the early part of the 20th century of Jewish music in Los Angeles as a commitment to tradition. There's, as we could see, this aspect of traditional music, cantors and choirs is a part of the fabric of LA's synagogue landscape. But also at the same time, there's tremendous innovation, creativity, and a real forward thinking of new ideas. And you could see the various genres of music that they're singing. So I think that this moment of 1938 in this period of time of really showing the geographic range of Los Angeles and its musical activities tells a really interesting story of a real commitment to keeping the Jewish tradition alive and also looking to do something new and creative, which we all know is a very, very, very much an important part of the city of Los Angeles. So I hope that provides a foundation for the next part of our discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kligman. That was amazing, especially hearing that just little piece of Yiddishkeit sung. There's something that pulls at my heart. There's something that I don't have words for. And I I can't see the rest of you, but I imagine for some of you, you have the same feeling. It's really interesting to me hearing you share all of those, the newspaper clippings, and really thinking not just about Jewish music in Los Angeles, but really Jewish aesthetics. And it makes so much sense because this is the place of aesthetics, right? This is the place that movies are made and that you can see both tall buildings and the oceans and the mountains. So hearing you talk about new commissions and artistic commissions that the rabbi wanted to have on the wall, really things for Jews to feel established and proud of, and really a place for creativity to thrive. And also hearing about opera and theater and liturgical crossovers. I think we often think of that stereotypical jazz singer, where he has to choose between the cantor and a life on stage, right? But we know that's never really been the case, that music has always been sort of collaborative and there's been lots of crossover. I personally, started singing when I was 5 years old. I was in a regional theater production of Peter Pan. And about the same time I started singing in a children's choir at my synagogue. We would tour the Bay Area doing choir competitions. So it's really just interesting hearing you set the stage and share about all of the crossovers, both aesthetically, but also sort of religiously and secularly. So thank you. And please, as we talk, feel free to add questions in the Q&A box. We'll read them and we can get to them. So Rabbi Yoshi, I'm really curious about sort of what you're thinking about what Dr. Kligman shared. And then if you can share a little bit about what it's been like to be a contemporary Jewish musician and composer and adapting contemporary melody to sort of ancient sacred texts, which is that true crossover.
Thank you. Also, I remember reading about Schoenberg that at a certain point in his life, he converted to Christianity as a way of, assimilating and being safe. And then in Vienna in the 1930s, he realized that wasn't going to keep him safe. And before leaving Europe altogether, he re-embraced his Judaism in Paris and reaffirmed that I don't know if I'm remembering it right, Dr. Kligman, but I think is that somewhat accurate?
Yeah, in Paris, it sort of he began to reconnect, but many people feel that this piece of music was his statement of coming back to Judaism.
So I just think about that, and I think about the day, it's October 27th, the third anniversary of the Tree of Life shooting. And, it's one thing to just sort of think of culture and the beautiful aspects of it. You were just talking, Cantor, about the aesthetics, and you think about brilliant composers and those names that you mentioned, Leonard Bernstein and Eddie Cantor and Schoenberg and these great composers. And then you realize that there's often a price to be paid, sadly, and sacrifice to be made, and that embracing your Judaism and standing for it and lifting it up was not always an easy choice, and it could, in fact, even endanger your life in some ways, whether as a writer or a composer. So I feel very lucky that that's not something I've ever experienced personally. But for me, I started writing music when I was a kid and just playing around with melodies. And I shared this with the congregation recently because I was trying to make a larger point about creativity. But when I was a kid, I would write songs. I had a ukulele, and I'd make up songs, and I'd stand on the fireplace. We had a little step on the fireplace, and I'd stand up there, and I'd take one of the pokers that you'd use for the fire, and I'd use that as a microphone. So not only did I like performing and hamming it up, but I liked making up songs. And then at some point, my dad got me a little tape recorder that had a microphone, and I would sing songs into the tape recorder. And that was really when I first started actually recording music. And I got so much joy out of that. And then later in life, actually, when I was in college, I made my first sort of tape. You know, I had made a cassette tape of songs that I'd written, and then I did another one when I was living in Omaha as a collaboration with a musician friend of mine named Steve Brodsky. And then we made another album together, this one out here in LA with Sam Glazer, who produced it for us, a really talented player and composer, arranger, and producer. And then another album with Gordon Lustig producing, also LA-based at the time. And then our most recent project with another LA-based producer named Kenley Mathis. So actually, as I think about it, and it wasn't until actually kind of just now that I realized, oh, wow, all of these projects were with LA-based producers. And I really enjoyed that experience. But I think, you know, for me, just the magic of creativity, you know, having something that didn't exist and then it exists, and wondering how did that happen. And I guess the last thing I'd say about this, just in terms of my own journey of learning more about Jewish music, because I'm not trained in the way Cantor Imma is in terms of a school of sacred music. And my musical background is I'm mostly self-taught, and along the way, you know, I've learned a little bit here and there about music theory, and learned how to read music and things like that, but I don't have any type of, you know, sort of formal or classic training in that regard. But I have learned a great deal along the way through relationships with cantors, through professors at HUC and elsewhere about, you know, how modes work. And when I was working in Jerusalem, I got to work with Eli Schleifer, you know, one of the greats. And he taught me a lot about the musical traditions in Jerusalem. And so as I've evolved as a teacher and as a student of Judaism, but also as a composer, I've learned a lot more about how to incorporate certain intervals and certain stylistic characteristics and other things into a piece of music to make it feel more rooted. And so there's a Micha Mocha that we do at the temple that includes one of those intervals. And I've also, just from a pragmatic point of view, I know that many of my colleagues in the cantorate are going to be more likely to embrace that music if it shows a certain fidelity to the tradition. But finding out how to do that in a way that's also, you know, fuses some of the other things that I want to bring into the conversation, I think is a really fun challenge. And I wonder, how can I do that so that it feels authentically Jewish and it feels like deeply rooted? And there's also something about it that feels very now and kind of urgent and contemporary.
Beautiful. I love hearing you sort of realize that all of these amazing collaborations were either done in LA or based in LA. And it's making me think a lot about what Dr. Kligman was sharing, and really as someone at this age who is thinking about, you know, laying down roots and yearning to buy a home. Every realtor says to us, you know, location, location, location. And I think that's really what we're talking about tonight. You know, we know that every Jewish community has local customs, but really, what is it that makes LA so special? I'm thinking a lot about location and the actual space of LA. Even, you know, Rabbi Yoshi, you pointed out that we're here on Zoom tonight, but being in LA this past year during COVID has actually allowed us to gather at the temple so much more frequently than my friends and colleagues who are on the East Coast say. My best friend is a cantor at a synagogue in Short Hills, New Jersey, and they were not able to do services outside for their B'nai Mitzvah. It made it a lot harder. So I'm thinking about, particularly during this time, how special it's been to be an LA cantor, clergy person, musician, and to be able to offer live music for people in a relatively safe way. That also makes me think a lot about all of the camps that we have in Los Angeles. JCA Shalom. I know my husband will be thrilled for me to mention Camp Alanim. He went there for many years, and he also learned to song lead there and fell in love with Israeli dance. And many of you know the very famous setting of Shema Kolenu by the Jewish composer Max Helfman. Shema Kolenu, right? It starts with that beautiful octave, and then there are some different nusachot that Yoshi was referencing, some more traditional modes that are sort of woven into a more operatic style piece. But Max Helfman actually was the composer for the Brandeis Bardin Institute in the 40s and 50s. And he wrote lots of songs that really helped make it sort of feel like more of a kibbutz vibe, a sort of kibbutz generation. So I'm thinking all about location and how special LA is, what an amazing environment it is to create music in, and also thinking about the next generation of Cantor Lutz's and Rabbi Zweiback's composers, and of Dr. Kligman's. Dr. Kligman, didn't you start, you played in the Northridge marching band, was that right?
Granada Hills High School Marching Band.
Granada Hills, okay, so there you have it. So, right, an activity that needed to be done outside in the beautiful Los Angeles field and sunshine. So it's just really sparking all of these thoughts for me about how special this city of LA is. I was reading this week too that when the city itself was formally established in 1850, there were only 8 Jews here, according to the city census. So if we look at the impact that Jews have had on Jewish music, again, not just liturgical, but really citywide, that has had such an impact on film and opera, it's really quite remarkable to think about us just being this, starting with 8 people and then growing into such a large contribution. Dr. Kligman, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about, we've talked a little bit about liturgical music, and I'm sure we'll have some questions about it, but I'd love to hear a little bit about Jewish music and film. And, some of my favorites, of course, like Danny Elfman and Leonard Bernstein and Jerry Goldstein, right? The list goes on and on. They've all had huge impacts, both in TV and film. So I'm wondering, are Jewish film composers really as high ranking as we think they are? Are they really more successful than others? And is there a new generation of young Jewish film composers here in LA?
It's not something that I know completely well, but in terms of trying to keep up with it, as kind of maybe we all do, in Los Angeles, certainly there's a disproportionate number of Jews who are part of that early list of film composers, both in the 40s and 50s, and really moving on well into other decades. Charlie Fox, who I know is a member of your congregation, and really many, many others. Jerry Goldsmith. It's a very, very long list, and I think that most of the scholars who've looked at the disproportionate amount of Jewish writers, Jewish producers, or Jews in Hollywood, it's in many ways that corporate America in the 30s and 40s was closed to Jews. There are so many different professions. There are many cities or neighborhoods that were closed, and LA represented this openness of opportunity. And it's something that Jews could really gravitate to in ways that didn't exist in prior experiences in Europe or in other parts of locations that they lived. So as far as I know, the whole film music industry, everyone says, is so different now than it used to be, in terms of the independentness that a lot of composers have to really find various opportunities. But there are many Jews that are there. The area that I was quite surprised to find is that, first off, LA is also the home to video game music. Most of that happens here in Los Angeles, and there are a number of Jews who write video game music, which is pretty interesting. Another interesting point to mention is that John Williams, one of his first experiences of scoring a film was scoring Fiddler on the Roof. He was the one that was the music director for Fiddler on the Roof. So, it's interesting to find, how there are connections in many different directions.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm embarrassed that I didn't know that, or maybe I did and had forgotten. So that's really exciting. You brought up a really interesting point about the unique immigrant experience and how there were opportunities for Jews, here in the 30s and 40s. And I'm thinking a lot about our community, which is not so Ashkenormative, right, to sort of use a technical term. But we have a lot of immigrants from Iran who came here in 1979 and afterwards, and who brought different nusachot, different traditions, different minhagim, different melodies. So I think that it's really interesting to think about waves of immigration having an effect on ritual and music, and also just opportunities in a city. And I love being at a place like Stephen Wise, where we can share in a conversation like this, where we're talking a lot about Yiddishkeit, and we're talking about that wave of immigrants who probably came like my grandparents in the early 1900s, but also that we, have a community where we sing Piyutim at the holidays, we sing Adon HaSlichot, and the face of every parent in our school who came as a child from Iran, they're instantly brought back to that really meaningful spiritual place. So that's really, really special.
I think that's really, I just wanted to add, I think that's so important to note too. And when you think about people like Schoenberg, and you think of what certain kinds of Jewish music sounds like, and you think of, Janowski and sort of, Middle European 19th century music, Jewish music that's so authentically Jewish. Of course, it sounds so Middle European 19th century. And then you hear melodies that come from North Africa and the Middle East, and it's influenced by that, and it sounds like that. But then when someone writes a piece of Jewish music that sounds like Peter, Paul, and Mary or the Beatles, all of a sudden there's something inauthentic about that. It's like, wait a second, that's what we've done in every place we've ever found ourselves. We've borrowed from the things that we heard in the general culture, and we made it Jewish by adding the text to it. We made it Jewish by making some other sort of connection, by adding Hebrew text, et cetera. But I think that that there's something important in that too, and the fact that you think about the Los Angeles-based composers right now, and there's so many of them, from Craig Taubman to Julie Silver to so many others. And you think about the influences, and the fact that they're here in LA is going to influence that in powerful ways. This center of the music recording industry for many, many decades.
Mm-hmm. Rabbi Yoshi, I'm recalling last year we made a video where we covered "You've Got a Friend." And then we had a friend of yours and you being such a fluent Hebrew speaker, translate the text, and we did it in Hebrew as well. And there is an interesting question about artistry and authenticity. And to me, it was such a prayerful experience, because it was a text that we so needed at the time to feel connected during COVID. We also had a wonderful opportunity. A member of our congregation is Ziggy Marley, who's a very famous, obviously, son of Bob, and a fantastic, brilliant musician in his own right, who did a piece with us last year. I think we did "This Land Is Your Land." Was it last Memorial Day? Or
right. And one of the questions is, is to what extent is that authentically sort of a Jewish experience? To what extent is that kind of kitsch? I think for "You've Got a Friend," obviously the original composers, notably Jewish. And then to add that text to it, and to say, well, is that really a Jewish song? Is it not? It might not be uniquely Jewish, but there is something about it that is probably particularly Jewish. And then by adding the Hebrew text, I'd be interested in hearing from Mark, what you make of those kinds of things, because obviously that happens all the time, where you get either there's a contrafaction where we take a melody from somewhere else, and then we put the words of a psalm over it, which Jews have been doing for a long, long time, or we do some sort of fusion or kind of mashup, as it were.
I'd love to answer that, and I'll do a very Jewish thing. I'll do it with telling a story. One of the things that I encountered in my research with the Syrian community in Brooklyn, who are real devotees of Rav Ovadia Yosef, one of the now deceased, but a former chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, very, very prolific rabbi with his tshuvot, was brought the question about whether or not that one can sing non-Jewish melodies in the synagogue. And he answers the question in quite a fascinating way. He says that, and he pulls out a Gemara that's in the tractate of Megillah that really talks about the aspect that if there are kalim or vessels of the temple that were part of Avodah Zorah or part of idolatrous practices, you needed to take that vessel and you needed to break it. There's no way that you could take a vessel, a physical vessel that was used for non-religious, non-Jewish, idolatrous purposes and somehow make it kadosh. There's no way to do that. But he says that it's fine with music. It's fine with music because he says the word that he uses, he says lo lehishtamesh ba, that the music is not a physical entity. So since music is recreated every time that it's done, it's a matter of what is the intention of the individual who's doing it. So that to me gave a very different insight into this level of borrowing than we typically have with many sort of Hasidic nigunim. People say, I've never seen it, but they say Hasidim could take jingle bells and make it, But the point being that for many Hasidim, they might say that it's a way to really elevate the tune, that with the godliness and the spirituality that's in the world, it's an opportunity to, uplift the use of that melody. I think Ovadia Yosef has such an interesting sort of fundamental approach to why music is different than other things.
It's really fascinating. By the way, I just wanted to say the kinds of things that are subject to tuma, ritual impurity. Yeah, it has to be a physical object. So a melody is not subject to ritual impurity, essentially. And I love that insight. Thank you.
Yeah, and in the work that I've done with all different Sephardic communities, Syrian, Moroccan, Turkish, Iraqi, this aspect of taking some secular melody and then creating a Jewish text out of it, it's all about the intention of making something Jewish. So I think that aspect of intentionality is really so important. And it only seems to be in the Western cultural context that we have a hang up as to what the origins of the melody is. It really doesn't bother many of these Sephardic communities. One quick comment about the Persian community is that many of the leading performers in the early and mid 20th century of traditional Iranian music were Jews. Nedavud is one name. There are many, many different master musicians in Iran that were Jewish. And there's similar stories about, Iraq as well. But I think that we, as Ashkenazim predominantly, can sort of take from that we have, I think, a historic or cultural license to say that our intentionality of what we're doing with the music has as much to do with the creative process as the melody.
That's such a beautiful, beautiful teaching. I love that. We've got the future of Jewish music right here. We usually sing a bedtime Shema every night, but somebody is in a toddler phase where she is postponing bedtime a little bit more every night because life is fun, right? I want to share some of the questions in the chat before we wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so. So I'm seeing that someone was asking Dr. Kligman about the augmented choirs. Were they congregants? Were they professionals? Was it a regular choir that they had weekly? Was this something special? Were there ringers that we would call them now, as some synagogue choirs have? So Dr. Kligman, anything else you can share?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. That's something that that I need to research further, and I'm perplexed by that as well.
Someone else wanted to know, is there an official society for Jewish music composers in LA or elsewhere? Yoshi, maybe you know the answer to that.
I don't know. What I do know and what I love is that my experience of LA, both rabbinic LA, the rabbinic community and the clergy community more broadly, but in the Jewish music community, is that it's incredibly supportive. And even though, you might imagine, well, you're kind of competing with each other for positions, or you're competing with each other for congregants, or if you're a working musician in the Jewish world, competing for each other with gigs. And what I've experienced is just incredible support, one for the other, which has just been great.
Wonderful. Ruby, do you have any comments? No? Okay. So I'm thinking also about, before we conclude, any concluding thoughts the two of you might have, but I'm thinking obviously a lot about the future of Jewish music in Los Angeles as I step into this role of senior cantor, first female senior clergy of the place. And there aren't very many female senior clergy in Reform synagogues, and certainly not in other synagogues. So I think a lot about what my role is in teaching music to the next generation, and including both young men and women in the musical rituals of our synagogue. It was really, it's interesting to see that all of the choirs advertised, of course, were male. And I just will share anecdotally that the other evening, 2 Fridays ago, I had sung through half of the Ma'ariv service for our Shabbat service. And I looked at the Tochnit, the order of service, and I thought, every single one of these pieces was written by a female composer. So I thought that was really beautiful. Chava Morel, Debbie Friedman, Alana Arian, all women who have now contributed to the Jewish musical scene. And of course, Debbie Friedman lived in Los Angeles for many years. So I'm thinking a lot about that, and really how exciting it is to be engaging the next generation of, God willing, song leaders and those who want to engage in Jewish ritual, and who will feel proud to see names of Jewish musicians on films and in opera halls and concert halls and things like that. So before we have a few concluding thoughts.
One thing I was just going to say, regarding Debbie, and I was fortunate, we weren't, incredibly close, but I did have many interactions with her over the years, and even included her in a song I wrote, which she got a kick out of. But the lyric was, I've done not by might, not by power, even sang Debbie Friedman in the shower. And she heard that at a Cage conference way back when, and laughed, thought it was really fun. But what's interesting is when you think about certain liturgical pieces that people consider, not just in the Reform movement, but people consider to be a melody that's like from Mount Sinai. First and foremost on that list is Debbie's Misha Berach. And there are people who are like, Rabbi, how come you didn't include the Misha Berach in the Friday night service? And if I tell them, well, it's not even part of the traditional Friday night liturgy, it doesn't matter. You don't do a service without including that piece of music. And if you use a different Misha Berach, it's not the right one. So I just use that as an example that, a person who contributed so much, and eventually the School of Sacred Music was named in her honor, which is a whole nother lecture that Mark could give, because that was a very, very interesting symbolic act and a very powerful one, and an important one. But I think of her contribution to me personally as a Jew, not as a composer, just as a Jew. And I can't imagine my Judaism without her in it. And I know that that's true of hundreds of thousands of Jews across the world.
Can I just make one comment at this point? So I think one of the fascinating stories that you hear amongst all African-American musicians in the United States in different genres of music, well, more 9 times or more out of 10 say that singing in the church was the foundation in their life, that form of expression was so much not only a part of their life, but was just foundational to their belief in the things that they did. And I think that the opportunity that we have in Los Angeles is that we have, thank God, very strong, healthy congregations, and congregational life is very vibrant for us. And if we look at the history of Jewish music in the United States, synagogues are a thriving, consistent institution that matter significantly. And I think it's for those of us that care about going to the synagogue and care about synagogue life, it's a great opportunity to say how we ground that with music has this formative ability to really shape that future. So I think that with all the different opportunities in a wonderful place like Stephen Weiss Temple that has a day school, that really has thriving institutions and structures, the way in which that has been done, for your first 50 or so years, to continue in that way, that music is just the foundation and closely integrated with so many aspects of Jewish life is really what's going to provide a very bright future.
Amen, ve'amen, ve'amen. What a nice nechemta. I know I speak for Yoshi when we say we couldn't agree with you more. I just want to say that I hope that this sort of just a taste of a conversation. I hope you're all, I know you're all as moved by Dr. Kligman's wisdom and teaching and presence as I have been, and I know Rabbi Yoshi's been for many, many years. So we're so grateful for you. And we also want to just invite you all to come to Shabbat service. Every week we have incredible live music in Los Angeles with musicians and singers, and it is deeply, deeply prayerful, and it is also aesthetically just beautiful. Being up on our campus, and now that we're doing it outside, just feeling the wind blow. We have heaters, but the sounds are deeply, deeply sacred. They are rooted in tradition and also in contemporary music, and I'm very proud of the services that we are offering. And I will reiterate what Dr. Kligman said, which I think that it matters. It matters very, very deeply to our spiritual well-being and also to the future of our communities. So we have a few things before you go just to share with you about future collaborations and some exciting things. And Dr. Kligman has a short video clip to share about what he's doing at the Lowell Milken Archive. So Dr. Kligman, why don't you share a little bit about what's going to happen on March 13th, and then share with us about the archive, if you would.
Sure. So March 13th, we're proud to announce a very interesting event, which will be a virtual event. It happens to be in 2022, the 113th anniversary of Mickey Katz's birth. So we're doing a 100th anniversary of Mickey Katz's bar mitzvah. We have many members of the Katz family who will be joining us, and we're formulating a great plan. And we're really happy that Cantor Lutz will be part of the numerous performers who will be a part of that. So stay tuned for that event. We hope that you can all join us.
Wonderful. I'm so excited. And were you going to share a little bit about the Milken Archive as well?
Yeah, so let me share with you some aspects of our Lowell Milken Center at UCLA. We do work closely with the archives, but we are a separate institution. And you can find information about us on our website. We have a very long name, the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience, but we have a short term, which is MAGE, for Music of American Jewish Experience. So if you just type in UCLA Jewish Music, UCLA MAGE, you'll find our page. And we have lots of very exciting events There's a Kol Nidre conference that I'm working on with another scholar in Israel that is looking at Kol Nidre in multiple theatrical contexts and musical contexts. We have a number of programs, one we're calling Meet the Musician, and our next guest is a member of Stephen Weiss, a composer, Charles Fox, to talk about the Jewish music that he writes. And we hope that you can join us. We're free virtual events. This is on Tuesday, the 16th. And we have a series of workshops as well. This one in klezmer music by Kurt Bjorling. And he's someone who's been very much a part of the klezmer revival, a clarinetist. And people can, again, this is all virtual. You bring your instrument, he teaches a tune, and you learn the stylizations. And we've had great success with these programs. A great way to find out about a lot of our activities is just to find our UCLA Lowell Milken Center MAGE page on YouTube. And you can see the many different events that we've done, various announcements of activities, various musicians who've taught, who have talked about their music, various presentations, and we have hours and hours of content. That's one of the hidden blessings of the pandemic, that we have wonderful material on very noted Jewish composers, such as Benji Allen Schiller, a former colleague of mine at HUC, teacher of Cantor Lutz's, and other really, really interesting individuals. So we hope that you look at our page. One of the interesting events that we did to begin our activities with the Lowell Milken Archive was the creation of a new musical work that explores the whole life of King David. And we called this work David's Quilt, and it brought together 15 different composers. Many of the composers were composers in the film or entertainment industry in LA, and they're part of the Max Helfman Institute group of composers, along with some students and a faculty member at UCLA. And we premiered this work in November of 2017 at Stephen Weiss Temple. We had over 800 people in attendance to come hear a work that no one has ever heard before. Really a real marker of the creative yearnings of people in Los Angeles. And this piece really marked something very special for me, in that it was a work that I don't think that many congregations would be able to do, because we had a choir, a 15-piece orchestra. We had the UCLA Chamber Singers sing in this. And it was somewhere that's a little more musically engaged than a musical, but not yet like an operetta. Something in that really complex middle of that was really right for us to really get involved. So I have a 4-minute clip, and I hope you'll stay with us to hear this. And again, you'll see this was filmed in the sanctuary at Stephen Weiss. This is told from the perspective of the love interest of Bathsheba. Bathsheba is the one who's singing.
You are his shepherd, why not mine? He walks in green pastures all the time, fearing no evil, his soul restored, my soul ignored. His heart rejoices, beats with joy. The Lord is his portion, the rest destroy. His love is as pure as a love can be, but not for me. Now I walk through a valley of shadows, he is not with me. I thought the love he poured out so faithfully anointed me. God of rescue, why not rescue me?
Wow. That was so spectacular and so exciting to see live music in our sanctuary. Thank you, Dr. Kligman. Thank you, Rabbi Yoshi. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. We're going to make this recording available, and we'll send an email tomorrow with some follow-up resources for you to enjoy. And Dr. Kligman, we're looking forward to lots and lots more of amazing conversations and musical collaborations with you and UCLA. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Look forward to it. Great to be with you.
Laila Tov, everybody, and an early, oh, it's only Wednesday. I thought it was Thursday. So not an early Shabbat Shalom, but Laila Tov, and join us for Shabbat, please.
Laila Tov, and thank you, Cantor Emma, for putting this beautiful program together. Thanks, everybody.
Privilege. Good night.